Well, good evening, everybody, and on behalf of Mayor O'Leary, I want to thank the residents and the community leaders and elected officials who are here tonight. Think of it, an identity as the Greenway, which in itself is an opportunity for an incredible improvement in character and quality of life in Waterbury, I believe.
My name is Ron Napoli. I am the chairman of the Waterbury Greenway Advisory Committee. I'd like to welcome you to our community workshop with regard to our Greenway project. We started planning this Greenway back in October of 2009. It's been a long road, but we're finally seeing light at the end of the tunnel. We were appointed by former Mayor George Ura, and we began initially by doing a routing study. We hired Alta Planning and Design to do a routing study for us, which basically laid out the route of the Greenway from Thomaston all the way down to the Naugatuck line. And that took quite a while to get through that process. We were fortunate to have funds donated by the United Way to pay for that study. And when that was done, we went out for bid and looked for the best companies we could find to actually work on the design of the Greenway. And we have hired RBA, group out of New York City and Connecticut, and they've been working for the last year or so on the design of the Greenway. And within the last 6 months or so, we were presented with a great opportunity to extend the Greenway from what was planned in phase 1 up through Eco Street to extend it. It's now called the Waterbury Active Transportation and Economic Resurgence Project. And we're trying to secure a significant amount of federal funds called the Tiger Grant to move this project along to minimize the impact on Waterbury's taxpayers. We're very happy with where we are. We're very happy with the work that RBA has done and that all the planning and design has done. And when we did the routing study, we had a public workshop just like this. And in that process, we got important feedback from residents like you who attended that workshop. And their comments were incorporated into the ultimate routing study. And hopefully tonight we'll get some good suggestions from you as well. Mayor O'Leary is out of town, but I'd like to introduce Kevin Delgado. He's the mayor's senior advisor. I'd just like to say a few words on behalf of Mayor O'Leary.
Well, good evening, everybody, and on behalf of Mayor O'Leary, I want to thank the residents and the community leaders and elected officials who are here tonight. You know, this project, which has been embraced now by multiple administrations and different community leaders and elected officials, really is and can be so important in Waterbury. We think of it, an identity as the Greenway, which in itself is an opportunity for an incredible improvement in character and quality of life in Waterbury, I believe. Actually, the Greenway begins at a point right across the street from where I grew up, on Platts Mills Road, corner of Sandy Avenue, and actually one of the people here. It was really kind of a catalyst. Kevin Zach, I see here saying it was kind of a catalyst for some of the early thoughts about what could happen. And as Kathy McNamara, the grants coordinator, has often said, you got to have some vision. And when I've been around the country at different sites, what we live here and can't imagine what the possibility could be. I've seen happen. I've been to places a decade ago and saw what it was, and I see what it is now in some major cities around the country, and it's incredible. So I think that's part of the discussion today. But I also wanted to emphasize one other aspect of what opportunity this is, and that is we've talked about it as the Greenway, but it is also thought of, and there's data and evidence to show what an incredible economic development tool this is for the cities that have gone down this kind of a path. And that's really a key part of the story as well. How this will transform the identity of the city to the river, the character of what the opportunities residents have, but also the economic development potential that we realize as a result of constructing this facility through the center. So I'm very excited about it. I know the mayor has been very excited and appreciative of the team, the elected officials and the staff of the city and others who put their heart and soul into this. And I'm very happy that we have residents here tonight to kind of offer their views on what the future of Waterbury can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. At this point, we'll turn it over to Jackson Landros of RBA Group for his presentation. Jackson.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Kevin. So I'm Jackson Wandrus. I work for a company called the RBA Group, and we are the city's consultant developing this design, this idea, these plans that we're going to go through tonight with you. With that, I'll just jump right in. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to go through this presentation, which is broken up about where this project came from. You heard a little bit about that from Ron and Kevin already. Then I'm going to tell you what this Tiger program is that we keep referring to. Then I'm going to go through the actual design that's been proposed so far, for which we are seeking these Tiger funds from the federal government. And then I'm going to explain why are we doing this. At the very end, I'm going to tell you what this is all intended to lead up to for Waterbury in terms of economic revitalization, recovery, resurgence. After I'm done with the presentation, we can talk here in this room as a group, and you can ask questions, give comments. But we're also going to have an opportunity to go back out into the lobby and look at the illustrations on the walls and the plans on the tables. And if you have very specific questions about specific aspects of what's been shown here, there's a bunch of us here from the RBA group who've been working on this project for months and in some cases years to answer your questions. And actually, I'm just going to point them all out. These four sitting way over here are all from RBA, and they're all experts in this project. And you can approach any one of them and ask a question about what's shown in the illustrations or shown on the plans. So as Ron said, the project that we're looking at tonight grows out of an earlier effort to imagine and then plan for and eventually design and build what we refer to as a greenway trail along the Naugatuck River, 44 miles in length total. 7 of those miles fall within the city limits of Waterbury. And Waterbury is diligently pursuing implementation of its 7 miles of the proposed Naugatuck River Greenway Trail. And that's happening now in essentially 3 pieces. We've made reference to phase 1 of this trail, and it starts at the southern city limit at the Naugatuck line and comes as far north as Eagle Street, the intersection of Eagle and South Main specifically. And that portion of the trail runs essentially along Platts Mills Road, and then it runs along the west side of South Main Street. And that project is actually being managed by Connecticut DOT because we are working on South Main Street, which is a state road. And that project is in final design right now and will likely go into construction in the spring of 2015. So it's funded, it's nearly complete in terms of design, and it's moving forward. So that's the first of the 3 pieces. What I'm going to be showing you here tonight is the next section of that trail, another 2 or 2.3 miles from Eagle Street north as far as West Main Street. But what I wanted to point out is that while this project began as just the next phase of the Greenway Trail project, in studying it and looking at the portion of the city of Waterbury that trail is proposed to navigate, we couldn't help but be kind of moved by the fact that downtown was so close to the river at that location, and that there seemed to be so much opportunity bound up in the sort of industrial lands adjacent to the river, right where we were going to go with our trail. And it started to seem like, well, maybe reintroducing Waterbury to its riverfront becomes a vehicle for helping Waterbury rebound economically. The river is basically the beginning of Waterbury. I mean, its industry was based on the river and the streams and the creeks that fed it originally. Water-powered mills churned out goods, and Waterbury grew into an economic powerhouse 100 years ago. Why can't the river be the catalyst for Waterbury's resurgence again today? So what we did was we said this has to be much more than just a trail project. This has to be a project about revitalizing downtown, bringing downtown to the waterfront, revitalizing these industrial lands that are no longer being put to their highest and best and most productive use. How do we do that? And we discovered, or we knew already, and we kind of had this in mind, that there is this program, this federal program, that makes money available for projects of exactly this type, the Tiger program. But it doesn't fund $2 or $3 or $4 million trail projects. It funds big, transformative economic revitalization projects in the tens of millions of dollars. And we thought, you know what, we have that project here. We just have to look beyond the trail and really look at this whole area. So what we did was, we took our trail project and we blew it up into a much bigger project with 5 discrete components. The first of which is, of course, the trail itself, from Eagle Street all the way to West Main Street. And part and parcel of that first component of our new water project is also building or setting the stage for the building of a big new park on the riverfront, just south of I-84, but very close to downtown Waterbury. And I'll be talking a lot more about that in the slides to come. The next piece, the next component of our project is rebuilding all of Freight Street from the river back to Meadow Street and including a bikeway on the south side of that street. The next piece, I should be pointing these things out as I say them. So the trail obviously starts at Eagle Street and makes its way along the river all the way up to West Main Street. And here's that park I referred to, just below I-84. And this is what we call the Freight Street Connector Project here. Comes all the way down to Meadow Street. And in fact, the bike trail, which you've already seen pictures of in the lobby, and I'll show you again here, doesn't just stop at Meadow. It wraps around, comes right down, and ties into the train station, which is being renovated as we speak, or will be shortly. The next project is the building of Jackson Street. So Jackson Street comes off of Bank Street down here, and it comes up a little ways. It's kind of a smidget of asphalt in a very tough area. But this project would rebuild Jackson Street and extend it all the way through to Freight Street, build a new intersection at Freight Street, and keep going with Jackson Street, a new street, all the way up to West Main Street. And I'll talk more about that later as well. And the last two parts are really about bringing people to the train station, celebrating the train station, reconnecting the train station to downtown, or more accurately, kind of expanding downtown to embrace the train station so that the train station in the future is no longer thought of as being on the edge of downtown, but sort of being the hub between downtown and this new neighborhood, which I'm going to talk about more later. So here's the train station, and one of the projects is this structure here. We're calling it the Library Park to the train station to the Riverfront Park connector. And again, I'll describe it in more detail in a moment. And then the last project is improvements to all of Meadow Street, basically from West Main all the way down to Bank Street, which is, I guess, down here. So all of Meadow Street, and that includes significant reconstruction of the intersections of Freight and Meadow and Grand and Meadow. And again, we'll go into that in more detail. So these are the 5 components of this water project for which we are seeking federal funds for construction. And as I said, we're seeking those funds from a U.S. Department of Transportation program called the TIGER program. TIGER stands for Transportation Investment Generating Economic Recovery. So it's projects that serve a transportation function on the surface of things, but they're the types of projects that will lead to economic revitalization, create jobs, stimulate redevelopment in depressed areas, etc. And below that little description there is a history of what the TIGER program has pumped into the American economy in the way of capital projects. So the most recent year, 2013, 52 projects were awarded a total of $474 million in funds. Now, TIGER is not, it's not a grant program. The city would have to spend the money and get reimbursed. And it also is a program, one of these federal programs, that requires that the local municipality, whose project it is, has to put up a percentage of the cost. So the minimum that the sponsor or the owner of the project can put up is 20%, and TIGER will consider funding the other 80%. What has happened over the years since 2009 when this program began is different municipalities trying to get these funds have begun sort of almost outbidding each other by saying, you know what, we'll put up 25% for our project, we'll put up 30% for our project. Today, it's not uncommon most projects, few projects get selected that are only putting up 20%. Most projects are putting up anywhere between 30 and 50% in local money to get the rest in federal money. That's how popular the program is. I mean, there's very few programs you can apply to for 10 or 15 or $20 million, but this is one. In Connecticut, Tiger has been put to pretty good use. Not in the first year that it was around. There were no projects in Connecticut in 2009, but in each of the subsequent years, large projects have been funded in Connecticut. And you can see New Haven, Hartford, and Bridgeport have all been the recipient of many millions of dollars in Tiger funding. And we're asking the question, after New Haven, Bridgeport, and Hartford, maybe it's Waterbury's turn. We'll see. We have no control over the process. It's highly competitive. The federal government will get hundreds of applications for funding, and they will probably fund 50 or 60 of them. So it is very competitive. And I sort of briefly described what Tiger is looking for: transportation projects that will generate economic recovery. So this is just a list of the types of things that the reviewers in Washington who work for the Department of Transportation look for when they receive these applications. You know, are you first and foremost proposing a transportation project? For example, we couldn't tell them that we're going to build the park with this money. We might clean up the land and run the trail through it, the trail being a transportation infrastructure asset. But that's why so much of this big project that we're calling the water project is about rebuilding roads and improving connections to the train station. And the trail, of course, is a transportation asset in that it provides bicycle and pedestrian access to all sorts of important destinations throughout town. But there are a lot of other things that they look at. They want to make sure that the investments we're proposing to make are sound, they make good economic sense. They want to make sure that the project is well received. You know, do the people that are going to be most impacted by this project really want it? You know, are there strong supporters out there in the form of other governmental organizations or not-for-profit organizations? And in the case of this project, we have all of that. We have commitments from Connecticut DOT, and we have a strong Greenway Advisory Committee that's been working hard for years to make this a reality. So this project is very well positioned. It's not something that somebody just dreamed up in a teacup a couple months ago and said, hey, let's go for a Tiger grant. It's been around for many years. And many of those other components I talked about also have a lot of history behind them. So this project is pulling together ideas from all over the map that have been around for a long time and trying to make them a reality and connecting them in a way that makes sense. So moving forward from tonight, we're having this public meeting to get your thoughts, your comments. There will be a meeting on Monday where the aldermen are getting together specifically to discuss just this project and the subject of putting up local money to attract the federal dollars. That meeting is happening on the 14th. The deadline for submitting the application is the 28th. The city is aiming to electronically submit their application package, which we are working diligently with them on preparing, on the 25th of this month. So time is running out for us. We're hard at work putting everything together. It's a comprehensive and complicated process. And then we'll wait until the fall. We'll wait until September to find out whether or not Waterbury is successful this year. If Waterbury is not successful in getting the money awarded this year, Waterbury can apply again next year with the very same project. And in the meantime, they can get a debriefing from USDOT as to why they weren't selected and suggestions as to how the application can be made stronger for the next year. So if this doesn't work, it's not over. And there are projects that were submitted 4 and 5 times that finally got awarded funds. So you know, we really believe this project has a lot of credibility and will do very well, but it's Washington, D.C. Who knows what goes on down there? So we will hope for the best. If the money is if the city is successful and hears in September that the federal government has chosen this project for 2014, the city will then have 2 years to finalize the plans and conduct whatever transactions are necessary to make it possible to put out contracts to build the greenway and the rest of the project. So that means 2 years for final design and securing environmental permits, et cetera. And then once those contracts are let, meaning contractors have been secured to build the project, the city then has 5 years to complete construction. So if all goes well, by September of 2021, hopefully everything that we're about to look at, and you've already looked at out in the lobby, will be a reality. So with that, I'll take you through it. And I know that some of you have already gotten good information from the folks out in the lobby, so I'll try not to be too verbose and take you through it. So you'll notice on each of these slides that look like this, which is just an overall bird's eye aerial view of Waterbury, and I'll just orient you quickly in case you're not sure what you're looking at here. Obviously in blue, the river in the foreground. We're looking east. Up here is the Waterbury Green. Here is I-84. And I'm going to start you guys off down here at the beginning of this section of the trail at Eagle Street. Now remember, the 2.2 miles of trail to the south are getting built. So the trail, by the time this project kicks off, will exist up to this point along the river. And we're picking up there and we're going to keep on going. Now the trail to the south, the Phase 1 project that's in design now, essentially proposes a trail alongside the edge of the roadway. And that same condition will continue north for just a bit. This is just kind of what we call an axonometric view of South Main Street and the trail next to the roadway and then the riverbank. And that's a rendering of what that could look like, but at this point we've yet to finalize design details like fencing and things like that. But essentially what we're looking at is, in general, a 12-foot wide asphalt path shared by cyclists and pedestrians, two-way, two directions, on the west side of the roadway. And of course, in this view, the river would be down here behind it. In fact, you can see a little bit of the water there. The river is right there next to South Main Street. So moving up just a little bit, we kind of quickly run out of this condition where the roadway is hard against the river, and we start getting businesses and buildings between South Main Street and the river, and we take the first opportunity to jump behind those buildings. But in some cases, the building gets very close to the top of the riverbank, and we know that we're in a tight spot. So this is one of those locations. And that's the rendering of what would be done there. In cases like that, where we're very close to the property owner, we are, of course, talking directly to these property owners about what's proposed, and we'd be working out the details of the design with them. And in this particular case, as you can see, we're talking about, where necessary, putting up privacy or security fencing at the back of the trail to keep folks out of other people's property where it's required. Continuing along, most of you hopefully are familiar with Roller Magic down there on South Main Street. And it's an interesting spot because it's very often we're high above the river and there's a very steep bank between where we want to put the trail and the water itself, but not at Roller Magic. At Roller Magic, we're only a few feet above the river, and at the back of that parking lot is a big, wide gravel bar that it's private property. We understand that, but a lot of people do use that gravel bar to access the water now. So this is a view taken recently of that parking lot, looking north, and the river is on your left, and Roller Magic building is on the right. And that's the rendering of, ideally, what it could be like there. That's not to say it will necessarily happen this way, because again, this rendering is showing a concept that actually is on private property. So again, we have met with and will continue to meet with the owner to see what we can work out in the way of trail design and access and all those sorts of things. But this is sort of the ideal hoped for outcome at this location. It's one of the few places where people can really get down and enjoy the water itself. Continuing north, we actually sort of run alongside the Mad River for a little bit, which is kind of cool, because it's kind of a neat little tributary to the Naugatuck. And we go behind the old Waterbury Buckle Corporation building. which is on the corner of South Main and Washington Avenue. And there is an old railroad spur that ran up behind here on a viaduct, and we're basically proposing to put the trail in the footprint of that old spur behind the old Buckle building, and then cross the Mad River. So this is actually a view taken from down by South Main Street, where the river goes under South Main Street, and we're looking west. And you can see here the concrete abutments from an old elevated viaduct that used to be up here in the air and ran behind the Buckle building, which is here on the left. And we're proposing to, as I said, run the trail in that old railroad right-of-way. The old concrete piers for the trestle that used to be there are still in the ground. And we build above them. And then a new prefabricated bridge would be dropped into place where or close to where the old bridge may have been at one time. And then we have a new crossing across Washington Avenue, which gets us across the street to the Animet site. So the Animet site is a really interesting and exciting moment along this Greenway route, because right now it's vacant, and the owner is working with the city to clean it up. And the city, in return for securing money to clean up some contamination on the site, has gotten the owner to agree to a 30-foot easement all along the river throughout this site, from Washington Avenue all the way to West Liberty Street. So we have 30 feet to work with for the trail, all along the river's edge. And here we have a tall concrete wall that holds up the Animet site, if you will, and keeps it from falling into the river. So here's a view on the Animet site with one of the old industrial buildings to the right, and the river is just behind this fence on the left. And there is this big concrete wall that just runs along, and what's proposed is actually a very generous trail and esplanade. Now, we don't know what will happen to this site in the future, but the idea is that it will get redeveloped. We have no control at this point in time over what that redevelopment might look like, but we're hoping that it's something that involves public access from time to time. Maybe there's a festival marketplace in there. Maybe there's a multiplex cinema in there. Something that the public can use and enjoy that doesn't require that we put up a big fence along the back of the trail, but that from time to time there could be a green market or there could be other activities going on here. So we've taken a little artistic license, and again, we're showing a sort of idealized future where this site gets redeveloped in an enlightened sort of way, where folks are using the site and interacting with the trail, and you've got your esplanade, and you've got seating, you've got information kiosks, and you've got bicyclists going by. We'll get there. So we pop out of, this is all the Animet site here, and we pop out of it right on West Liberty Street. We do not hug the river here because there's two bridges. There's the remnants of an old railroad bridge, and then there's a roadway bridge. And the abutments of that roadway bridge literally come down in the water of the river. And it's also very low. And getting under there and around there is an engineering obstacle. There's also another active railroad bridge on the west side of Bank Street. And so between what's left of this old bridge, the roadway bridge, and the next railroad bridge, we've taken the trail out onto West Liberty Street and then up Bank Street just a bit, and then we turn in at Jackson. But I'll just show you what we're doing on West Liberty real quick. There's a church at that location, corner of West Liberty and Bank Street, Reformation Church. We've met with them, and they're incredibly supportive of this project. And that's the sidewalk in front of their church on West Liberty. The Home Depot is across the street to the right. And that's the rendering of what we would do. We'd actually narrow Liberty Street a little bit, move the utility poles out into a new planted amenity strip, and put the trail where the sidewalk is. So you essentially end up with a shared use path or shared use sidewalk running alongside the church. I mentioned that we go along West Liberty and then up Bank Street a bit, and then we turn in at Jackson Street and we go underneath, again, we go underneath this railroad bridge that's here now, and then we're into a big, wide, open space This land is all vacant now. There are a couple of private parcels at the southern end down here, but the vast majority of this land is currently owned by Connecticut Light and Power. And we're proposing that this be the site in the future of a big new 9-acre riverfront park. Again, we wouldn't be proposing to use the Tiger funding to build all of the final park amenities, if you will. We wouldn't be building tennis courts and soccer fields and playgrounds with the Tiger money. That's not its intended purpose. But being that we are running the trail through this area, we would green it all up, plant a lot of edgelessly wide road that only has sidewalks sporadically on the one side, and in any case, you can see the condition that it's in. This is the concept for rebuilding Freight Street, where we really create these big, generous green spaces that capture all the stormwater that falls on the bikeway and the roadway. So it's an environmental project as much as a transportation project, as much as an economic revitalization project. Here's our bikeway, there's a sidewalk behind there. All of these are meant to be what we call rainwater tree pits. The water flows into them, so we don't overload the sewer system and pollute the river. This is just another view from eye level. And note, this is the building. Some of you may know it as Phoenix Soil, which is not there anymore, and the building is empty, and the site is up for cleanup and eventual redevelopment. But I point that out because, again, we've taken a little artistic license here. Now you're starting to get a hint of what we're after in this area, this industrial zone between the river and downtown. It's not just about fixing potholes and building a trail. It's about imagining a whole new future for this big section of Waterbury that's kind of sitting there doing nothing right now. So we've showed that same building, but completely renovated into God knows what. It could be gallery spaces with lofts upstairs. There could be some kind of artistic light manufacturing business building stage sets for Broadway shows. I mean, the possibilities are really limitless here, but the idea is that this whole district surrounding Freight Street to the south and the north starts to turn over and turn into a new neighborhood with a very different vibe and a very different feel. Something new for Waterbury that it's never had before, maybe a kind of cultural arts entertainment district on the waterfront. Now we take the trail across to the west side of the river here at Freight Street, and the reason we do that is because this property is owned by Connecticut Light and Power, and their building is extremely tight to, again, a big concrete retaining wall. And then on the other side of that retaining wall, you're right down in the floodplain of the river. And we didn't really see any opportunity to get along the riverbank here, so we said, you know what? There's a really nice stretch on Riverside Street across the river where we can implement this trail at far lower cost and give people a nice view of the river. So that's where we went. We went across to the west side of the river. Plus, it's kind of nice, folks on the west side of the river can actually get down there and use that to get up to West Main Street, etc. But here's the bridge crossing, and we're not doing a whole lot here because the sidewalks are really quite nice, actually. This herringbone brick is not something you find every day anymore. It's a relic of fine workmanship from a day gone by. So we've put the bike lanes on the roadway. Created a new crossing down here so they can, easily access the bike lanes. But once you get across, you're onto Riverside Street, which looks like this right now, and it's wider than it needs to be. And so the proposal is to narrow it up a bit and put in a guide rail and a fence and a narrow 10 or 12 foot wide shared use path right along the edge of the road. And again, the water is actually not visible in this image, but it's right down here. At the bottom of this fairly steep embankment. That gets us to West Main Street, where we cross back over the bridge in a fashion similar to what I showed you for the Freight Street Bridge. And the trail goes down West Main Street and terminates at Thomaston Avenue, where we would have a little trailhead and a small parking area. And it would be like the path that I showed you for Freight Street on the south side of West Main Street. And we have a little rendering of that as well. Note the sidewalk. Note the room behind the fence line. And note the sort of lack of anything here except for parking. And again, I've begun to tip my hand here, right? We're starting to think of this whole area as having redevelopment potential. So here we've taken a lot of artistic license. And this is the only bit that we'd be building with our Tiger funds, is this asphalt bikeway and the planted strip between it and West Main Street. Everything beyond it is at the whim of the market. But we've done some market research, and we think there is real opportunity here to start seeing some interesting redevelopment on these parcels. It's not to say that we can make it happen. It's not to say that the people who own these parcels now will just pick up and leave. But if their land becomes far more valuable as a result of this project, there's a big incentive for them to not stand in the way of this kind of redevelopment opportunity. So there's two more components to this project. Referred to them earlier. Remember, now here's the train station with the tall tower. Here's Library Park. And what I want to talk about now is this Library Park to the train station and to the riverfront connector. Again, going back to what I was talking about, here's the green and here's downtown. If you could walk from the green straight to the river, it's 1/2 mile, or about 10 city blocks. But when you're here and you're downtown, you have no concept that there is a river down here. If we were to build the park, you'd still have no concept that there's a park down there. But if you made it possible to walk straight there, and you could do it from the green in, say, 15 minutes, that's a big incentive to start exploring your river and your new park. And what we saw was an opportunity, because of the grading of the land, to come through Library Park to the southern end of Library Park and go straight out over the top of Meadow Street, which is about 20 feet below you at that point, and across the railroad tracks, and ramp down and put a little spur trail right into the park. So that the idea is from here you could walk down Church Street or whatever and through the park and over the bridge, and you're here. Maybe it takes 10 minutes for somebody who's in a big rush, 15 for somebody else, 20 for somebody who's strolling along slowly. But this has another major benefit, which is that if we put another ramp going north, it takes you right to the train station. So now we have a traffic-free pedestrian route from downtown to the train station. And there's a lot of work going on at the train station, a lot of investment and a lot of attention being paid to this line, to this rail line. For example, if you've been down there, you'll notice that the buildings that used to line Meadow Street here below the train station are gone. That's because a brand new plaza and drop-off area and parking lot are being built by WDC in front of the train station. There's also money secured, and construction will begin on the renovation of the southern portion of the original train station building, turning it back into a waiting room. And then the Connecticut DOT, as we speak, is prepared to put $7 million into upgrading the signalization along this passenger rail line with an eye towards increasing service to the Waterbury station. In addition to that, the state is also implementing within the coming year an express bus service from the train station to New Britain with connection to Hartford. And those buses will run half-hourly in the AM and PM peak periods, up to 20 buses a day. So what you're going to start to see over the next 2 to 5 years is a lot more activity at the train station. And a lot more people are going to want to be getting there and back, and they're not all going to be driving. People are going to want to walk there and ride their bikes there. And what this project does is make it possible for them to do that. So that structure that I referred to here serves a lot of utility. We took this picture from the top of the tower just a week or two ago. And as I mentioned, here's the demolition in progress of the old building that used to stand there, and this will be turned into a plaza and a parking lot and a drop-off area for the revitalized train station. And that's a rendering of eventually what will happen when the WDC project is implemented and our proposed connector structure is built. Coming straight out of Library Park, with a ramp going north to the train station, continuing over the tracks, and a ramp going south to a little spur trail that makes its way under the highway, and the river's right there. The park is right beyond the highway. It's really close. The last component of this project, from a design point of view, I just want to introduce you to, has a lot of the same goals attached to it. It's improvements all along Meadow Street from West Main all the way down to Bank, and in particular, redesigning and rebuilding this critical intersection of Grand and Meadow. So here's that intersection from up in the air, again, from up on top of the tower. And note how long these crossings are, how many lanes of traffic, how wide these lanes are. That lane is about 20 feet wide. Look at this. Look how wide the pavement is here, how long and spread out that crossing is because of that long, generous, high-speed turn that you can make right now off of Meadow onto Grand. Our concept tightens it all up, makes the island a lot bigger, builds neck downs at the corners, tightens up the turn radius at the corners, expands the sidewalk adjacent to Library Park here, and essentially makes it, if you are coming on foot down Grand Street, it makes it a lot easier to get to the train station. The other thing that's in this rendering, again, I mentioned this before, here's Freight Street, and here's the bike trail on Freight Street. It comes right around the corner, it comes right down in front of the newspaper building, right down to the train station. And the last thing is, I would point out, we've put in bike lanes adjacent to the curbs on both sides of Meadow Street, from West Main all the way down to Bank Street. So Meadow Street becomes more of an urban complete street, as we say, friendly for bikes, friendly for pedestrians, and a lot greener to boot. And these are just some pictures of the types of on-street bicycle facilities we might consider for Meadow Street, and some pictures of the kind of pedestrian improvements we might consider at the intersections at West Main, at Grand, and further south. So this is the last part of my presentation, the fourth point from that overview at the very beginning, and I'll be done in about 5 minutes. Let me just remind everybody that when I'm done here, we can do some questions, we can do some Q&A right here in this room, but the idea is that if you have like real specific comments, real specific questions about anything that was in here, we can take those questions and we can take those comments out in the lobby afterwards at any one of those stations where the maps and the renderings are displayed, and my colleagues and I will be there and we can talk to you face to face and get into it in more detail at that time. But again, the whole point of this project is economic resurgence for Waterbury, and we've done some research. So here's an old print. Probably somebody went up in a balloon 150 years ago, and this is the location of the green today. And here's that whole big area behind the train station. All this area is what we've just been looking at. And you can see it was just nothing but railroad spurs and warehouses and factories lining the Naugatuck River here. And this is what we're talking about. Taking downtown and bringing it to the river, making the train station as much of a focal point and centerpiece to Waterbury's downtown as the green is today, and revitalizing all this land out here by the river. Another view basically showing you, here's the green. This interior circle, that's got a half-mile diameter, meaning all the way across. So you can see, here's the green, here's the river, here's our park, half a mile away and you're there. The white buildings sort of constitute the primary downtown area, and we're looking at these purple areas as areas of opportunity. Areas that have industrial or have had industrial use for the last 100 years, but aren't really serving that purpose entirely anymore. Now, mind you, we recognize that there are viable businesses in these areas providing extremely valuable jobs, and it's not the intention to displace anything. We're talking about incremental change over 5, 10, or 15 years. But out of that comes a lot of new jobs and a lot of new opportunity. So here's what our numbers are telling us right now, and this is a conservative appraisal of what the market could bear each year for the next 10 years. The details are kind of down here on the bottom. In 10 years, a minimum of 19,000 new residential units If we assume that we're going to capture only 10 to 20% of that in this area, that's 1,900 to 3,800 new residential units a year for 10 years. That's a significant market share to capture and bring into this area. That's residential. There is market for some additional office space. Again, same thing. We're looking at almost 400,000 regionally by 2020. So we're looking at 10,000 square feet each year for the next 10 years in expansion of the office market. And with the new residential, obviously comes a supplemental demand for neighborhood scale retail, food service, all sorts of other things. So if you put all those things together, you begin to have a critical mass of residential, office, commercial, retail, and that's not even considering entertainment venues that might come into this area, or what we call light manufacturing or high-tech manufacturing, or types of manufacturing and industry that are actually compatible, clean and compatible with living and working in an office. So what does that look like from a land use development point of view? Again, here's the green, and here's our quarter mile, and this is our half mile. And we're really focused on this area here as being where it all begins, because it is the area of overlap between downtown and the river. Here's that same area. Again, the green, Library Park, where is it? Train station, West Main Street, Freight Street. And we're really looking at this area where Freight Street plays a critical role as the spine in the middle of it all. That together with our proposed Jackson Street. So Freight Street gets rebuilt, Jackson Street gets put all the way through, and that sort of cruciform of rebuilt and new built streets really starts to position this area competitively for redevelopment. And it would start slow. We don't know where it would start. We have no control over who's going to come out first and say, we want to do this here, we want to do that there. But it could start in bits and pieces. And the idea here that's being illustrated is that as new developers say, we want to develop this parcel, we want to develop that parcel, you could get them starting to build some of the smaller interior streets that this new neighborhood would require. And little by little, again, we're talking about 5, 10, 15 years, this could begin to develop. Until what you have is a whole new neighborhood, the Freight Street district, the Freight Street neighborhood, or the waterfront district, the waterfront neighborhood, whatever you want to call it, whatever it ends up calling itself. But there's folks in this room who've been around the country and seen this happen in a lot of other cities. Minneapolis, Denver, even Hartford it's happening in now. Albany has rediscovered its waterfront. This is happening all over the country. Old industrial cities that have these derelict waterfronts are realizing that there's a lot of potential in reclaiming the waterfront and repurposing a lot of the old buildings, or if not, at least cleaning up those sites and making them available for redevelopment. So we think Waterbury has a lot of potential here to do the same. And what might it look like? I don't know. That's up to the architects and the planners and the designers, but these are shots from other neighborhoods that have emerged, just like we're proposing here. Mixes of old and new, sometimes sympathetic, sometimes adventurous and creative. There's really no limit to what people can come up with when they get a blank slate like we have here. And that's it. Thank you very much. So like I said, if folks have questions or comments they want to give right here, right now, I'm here. Maybe we give it a few minutes. If not, we can retire out to the lobby and go ahead.
Question. Yes, the impact of the revised I-84, is that going to be worked into this entire plan? Or which comes first?
This comes first. The rebuilding of the I-84/Route 8 intersection, ConDOT's big project that has been referred to in the past as the mix master. What we understand, essentially have been told by CONDOT, is that project is well out in the future at this point. It's not happening anytime soon. And even if it were happening soon, they have at least 8 different alternatives that they've studied. They have identified a preferred alternative among them, but there's nothing that they're proposing to do that would preclude any of this work from happening. And the one area of overlap, and I should have mentioned this earlier, the rebuilding, or the building and the extending of Jackson Street all the way through to West Main Street is not a new idea. This is a perfect example of how this proposed project is tying together ideas that have been kicking around for a long time. A feasibility study was done in 2001, looking at building that street all the way through. And then CONDOT, later on their own, when they were studying the mix master idea, also looked at the feasibility and the utility of building out Jackson Street all the way to West Main Street. But at this point, we understand that they can only build so many mega projects, and they've got a couple others also that they want to do, one in Hartford. And this one's not the top priority right now. And so you're probably looking at the soonest, don't quote me on this, but 2024 or something like that before they get started. Yes?
Where do we go from here if we don't get the Tiger?
We reapply next year.
And again, it's, if we don't get the Tiger grant, what happens?
The first thing we do is we sit down with the reviewers in Washington at the US DOT. We find out, why didn't we get the Tiger grant? And they'll be honest. And they'll say, you should have got the Tiger grant, but you know what, South Dakota had this other project and they haven't ever gotten anything and you got bumped for them or something. I mean, I'm just making up a story.
Say it's too pedestrian and bicycle oriented and not transportation enough.
We don't think they'll say that. I mean, our experience, having surveyed and looked at dozens of Tiger grant awarded projects over the last 5 years, indicates that this project is entirely consistent with the types of projects.
The viability of the completion of this depends on getting a Tiger grant.
Yeah, we can't build what I just showed you without getting the federal funds.
Okay.
Because right now we're looking at a scenario where maybe a third of the total project cost would be borne locally, and 2/3 would come from the federal government. So
One more question. I'm not sure if you're the person to answer it or not. But who or how will this project be maintained if it is built?
well, we can go through the different parts of it. The trail would become a City of Waterbury recreational asset and maintained by the City of Waterbury. Same with the park. Freight Street is just a street. It happens to have a bikeway on one side of it, but it's a street. Jurisdiction of, well, actually, Freight Street is a state route. That road is a state road. And so something we will be working out in those 2 years if we get awarded the money. Any Freight Street, no, I'm sorry. Please correct me when I'm wrong. West Main and Meadow Street are state roads. Freight Street is a city street. So Freight Street, as you saw it depicted, will be a city street and the city will maintain it. West Main Street, where we're proposing to put a section of the trail along the south side, is a state road. They will certainly have to approve whatever design we propose that encroaches into their right-of-way. We don't know this right now because we haven't fleshed all of these details out here with them, but we have shown this idea. We have shown these designs, but you've seen, CONDOT has seen everything. And there have been a number of meetings with them. They support it. They think it's a great idea. But if I had to go out on a limb and say right now who's going to maintain that section of trail on West Main Street, probably the city will have to step up and maintain that. And of course, Meadow Street, it's a state road. I actually don't know. You're right. I'm not the guy to answer every one of these questions. It's a state road. I don't know who maintains the pavement and the pavement markings and the signs and all the signal infrastructure and everything on Meadow Street right now. But whoever is maintaining it would continue to maintain it in the future. But there's nothing there that we've proposed that is wildly, maintenance intensive. Now, it gets a little more interesting with that library connector project. That's a new structure. It might end up being steel, it might end up being fiberglass. We don't know what it'll end up being yet, if it gets approved and funded. But my guess is, even though it's going to be crossing over state DOT right-of-way, I doubt the state is going to volunteer to own that bridge and take on the maintenance liability associated with it. So if I had to guess, the city will have to step up and say, all right, yep, we'll take that, that's on us. And I think that basically covers it. That's pretty much the whole project. So, any other questions? Yeah.
You touched on an interesting point where you said that grant money is drying up in Washington and it might not be available for this project. Have you folks incorporated within the feasibility study maybe a P3 initiative like Chicago's done with public and private investment?
We have not done. I mean, we can't say for certainty that Tiger will exist for another year or 2 years or 4 years or what. What we do know is that there is $600 million allocated for 2014. So a bunch of projects will be selected this year. What we can also say is that there has always been a program. It's been called many different things over the years, but since 1996, there's always been a federal program to fund big transformative transportation projects like this. Before this, the Tiger program used to be known as ARRA. What did that stand for, Steve? Something with American Recovery, American, ARRA, right? I can't remember what it stood for now. But it was essentially the precursor to the Tiger program, and before it was ARRA, it was something else. So even if, in 2015, there isn't a program called Tiger per se, usually these things change with the administrations, right? New administration comes in and they make it sound like, hey, we've got a big new idea, it's called X, but it's really the same old idea dressed up in new clothing.
Are you familiar with what Chicago has done, like Rahm Emanuel and Bill Clinton have done with the Chicago Infrastructure Trust, where they're actually getting partners like Bank of America and the energy producers to retrofit a lot of buildings?
I'm not so familiar with what's going on in Chicago, no. I am familiar with a lot of the public-private initiatives that were begun and implemented under Bloomberg in New York City. It wasn't called a particular program, but it was aggressively pursued. These types of public-private ownership arrangements where, private entities ended up funding the construction of capital improvements and then being given the right to sort of own and maintain and charge rents on developments built in concert with those improvements. So there is a lot of opportunity to do that. No, we're not investigating that avenue for Waterbury right now, but I began to hint at that when I said this project is meant to sort of set the table, if you will, sort of reach a certain basic level of infrastructure in this district that we were calling the Freight Street District or whatever. The two major roads that are kind of needed to provide access to these parcels that they need to in turn be viewed as marketable by potential developers. What we're saying is Waterbury wants your help, federal government, in at least getting the basics in place. And then, if those big parcels need to be subdivided further to make them more developable, that's on the developers. And there's plenty of precedent to show that that works. We're involved in a big project on the Philadelphia waterfront right now. First, they did a big master plan for the whole Delaware River waterfront directly adjacent to Center City. They're building out certain infrastructure, including a 5-mile-long trail all along the Delaware River. And then they're getting the developers to pony up the money to build some of the interior courts and small local streets that will serve the new buildings that get built in the entirely rezoned waterfront. And that, and again, my hometown is New York City, and I've been watching that happen for the last 20 years. Queens West Development Corporation sprung up, and suddenly 40 acres on the East River was completely redeveloped and rebuilt by the developers who made that development happen. The oldest and best example of that is Battery Park City in Lower Manhattan. You know, the state built the land, created the land for that and put in the basic infrastructure, and then the developers came in and did the rest. So, you know, that model of public-private partnership in developing new neighborhoods goes back a long way. And it's certainly a vehicle that Waterbury can explore. But right now, we're focused on this one funding program and getting a chunk of cash that we can use to build basic infrastructure that will get developers interested and coming forward and saying, you've really got something here. We can work with you on this.
I know we're talking about Chicago and New York and Philadelphia, but I'd like to see any cities that are the size of Waterbury that we could look at and maybe see that they've had success with this, because obviously it's a different demographic with those big cities, and
Right.
comparing waterfront, it kind of isn't comparable. But is there a New England city that had the same type of demographic as Waterbury that did this and saw revitalization happen? Is there anything, anywhere we can look online or something like that, or even
There
go
is.
visit the
I
city?
can't pull them out of my head. I wish I was Dumbledore and I had that thing where I could grab those memories, but sorry. There are, you know, like 150,000 person cities of that
Yeah,
size.
I mean, we're
they're
100,000.
around.
There's
They're definitely
100,000 people in the city.
you know, and again, yeah, they've done it, and they've done it not obviously on the same scale as
Right.
cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, but they've replicated the same model. Do you want to throw something out there, Joe?
I would say, the city of Lowell is, old industrial place, canals, the whole 9 yards, and they've invested with the National Park Service in their waterfront, their historic industrial buildings, and have become a bit of a destination now for tourism or just for sort of urban living. And just to the east of us, Hartford is another example where riverfront recapture took 30 years to happen. But now you've got a riverfront that's re-access to the Connecticut River. They get thousands and thousands of people visiting that every year, and it's still a work in progress, and they're still building the connection to it. But that's the selling point for companies, for young employees. That's how you do economic development.
You know where I was not so long ago? I was blown away. Charleston, South Carolina.
Okay.
Oh my God, you should see their riverfront. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. It's not a huge city,
Right.
but man, did they capitalize on the old industrial architecture there. And they're lucky. I mean, that's on a major shipping canal. I mean, there's a huge port nearby. Savannah, Georgia, same thing. But they did it. It's in very, very early days yet, but Albany is in the very beginning stages of the same sort of thing that we're talking about doing here. A small city that I've done some work in that has completely revitalized its waterfront on a small, intimate scale, very successfully, Kingston, New York, on the Rondout Creek. Go down to the Strand and check out, their waterfront. And you'll see it. You'll see little by little incubator businesses popping up in places you wouldn't have thought they were. And a small warehouse, maybe it's a 15,000 square foot building, but suddenly it's got 6 lofts in it. You're seeing that kind of thing happen now on the Kingston waterfront. So there's definitely a lot of precedent for this. Yes.
At one point, I think there were plans for the Greenway to stretch unbroken all the way up to, I think, Torrington. Are they still talking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Watertown is pursuing greenway planning and design. Naugatuck has implemented sections of, the plan is still there for a 44-mile long greenway along the Naugatuck River. In fact, there's one board out in the lobby that shows it, and it's color-coded to show you which different pieces are in which stages of, completion. And so I started off this discussion really focused on Waterbury's 7 miles of that 44-mile long greenway. But that master plan is still out there. Ron Napoli made reference to it earlier. And the other towns to the north and south are also doing what they can to make that happen. Yes?
There were redevelopment of downtown. Is that going to be included in this greenway?
There are concurrent efforts by the city of Waterbury to stimulate redevelopment in the downtown core. I'm not really up to date on the latest and greatest, the status of those efforts. To the extent, we will be talking about that in our application for this money to say, the work that we're proposing to do here complements other ongoing efforts by the city of Waterbury to revitalize downtown, to beautify the streetscapes there, to reposition certain properties, to redevelop and attract new tenants downtown. We see the two things not at all as competitive with each other, but completely complementary. And we believe that the federal government, folks reviewing our application will see it that way as well. So, yeah.
You mentioned some demand numbers for office space and living space. How do you derive those numbers?
I can't really tell you. I'm a landscape architect and urban planner, but we have an economic consultant on our team who unfortunately is not here with us tonight, but we have a study, and I guess, via our client within the city, perhaps we could make that data available.
Another city up north here is Providence, Rhode Island. They had a riverfront project ongoing, and they completed the majority of it.
Yeah, I was going to mention Providence before, but some people react badly when I say Providence. I don't know why. I was a little afraid to bring Providence up as a precedent for Waterbury. But yeah, Providence does have a nice waterfront revitalization effort going on. I think one of the big things here is to bring in a lot of partners. Get the hospital involved, get UConn involved, get them interested in developing a satellite facility on the river or something, The more big institutional partners we have, in addition to our not-for-profit partners and our government sector partners and our private partners, the better. I think that's where you start to see some real opportunity for that almost public-private type of partnership. Anybody else got any questions or comments? Yeah?
It doesn't have anything to do with the project, but one suggestion I made various our meetings, at least, is between Free Street and West Main and up to Meadow Street, by the river there. Also, put a access center like Hartford has, a sports and convention center with the ramp garage somewhere. That would bring a lot of traffic into the area. When we have these national basketball tournaments, we'd be an entity just like Hubbard Park, Hubbard Garden, Bridgeport. So that's one entity we can look at as well too.
There's so many opportunities. There's so many things that could go in there. I mean, ideally, what would go in there? I'm not a super huge fan of like the minor league baseball park because it takes up a huge footprint of land and it generates big crowds for short periods of time, and then it sits empty for long periods of time. And, I've been to the one in Bridgeport, and like I said, I live in New York City. I've seen the Yankees minor league ballpark on Staten Island, and the Mets minor league ballpark in Coney Island. And if you have a lot of other stuff going on right around it, and it maintains a tight footprint, and it gets reprogrammed for other activities in between games, it can be a nice neighbor. That's what we're looking for here. Is a broad spectrum of uses, all of which complement each other. A sports venue that's wide open and requires lots of surface parking is not our ideal tenant for this particular new neighborhood. But that said, I mentioned the multiplex cinema, or perhaps an indoor sports-oriented entertainment venue, like you could have indoor soccer field or something that's operational practically 24/7 all year long, where kids are coming down there to do tournaments and soccer clubs are working out and there's people coming and going all the time. And, I mean, there's lots of opportunity here. It's not just about loft-style apartments and little cafes and bookstores, and that's nice, and we'd like to see that happen, but that could happen in downtown too. So we have to keep our mind open to all sorts of opportunities for this area. Yes?
So there's been a big problem with hazardous waste and toxic chemicals in this area of Freight Street and the Nortuck River. Will this all be cleaned up and tested? And
the things that we touch with our project will have to be cleaned up before we touch them. this project will not go in and remediate contamination on every site in the area. That will be tackled in a variety of ways moving forward. The city has a very proactive brownfield remediation program. It's got active projects going on at least 5 different sites around the city now. The Animet site that I mentioned before, $2 million has been secured to just clean the contamination on that site, and they're working very closely with the property owner to implement that. Something is in the works for the Phoenix soil site. There are other sites as well. So that's a program that the city is implementing, but there is also going after the existing owners and getting them to do what they're legally required to do. That's another vehicle or avenue to pursue. And then of course there is, if a site is attractive enough to a developer, they may say, you know what, if you let us do this, this, and this on the site, we'll clean it up. I mean, like I said, I'm not from Waterbury, I live in Brooklyn, New York. They just built a Whole Foods supermarket on the Gowanus Canal. The Gowanus Canal is an EPA Superfund site. Whole Foods determined that it was worth it to them to clean that site up and cap it and build their supermarket there. And I'm sure they were right. They know what they're doing. I've been down there since it opened, and it's phenomenal. And there's a park along the canal.
The tomatoes are like this big.
Yeah, and they glow in the dark too. So, yes.
Actually, my point was along the same line as the gentleman who just spoke. There's a place out in California that has a huge agricultural facility, and not only do they grow crops for the city, but they sell a large amount of food for other places. I didn't know if that was ever talked about.
We haven't. I mean, again, urban agriculture is catching on in major cities all across the country. More and more urban dwellers are growing vegetables on their roofs, and it's actually becoming a business, a profitable business. People growing produce in cities is actually starting to become a reality. Very small, but it's nascent, but it's working. No, we don't have that aspect incorporated into this project. It falls into the same category. It's like what we're trying to do again is set the table for private investment to come in and say, we like this parcel here and here's what we want to do. And at that point, the door is wide open between the current property owner, the prospective developer, and the city to sit down and work something out that's to the benefit of everybody. The city is going to be embarking on an update of its comprehensive plan soon, and that's a vehicle to really look at this area that we just looked at very critically and come up with a vision for how they want to see it redeveloped. And there is an opportunity to rezone. And in the rezoning, start to point to certain types of redevelopment that the city would like to see happen there. Again, I've been a party to this process time and time again in New York City, and it's all subject to negotiation, really. So if urban agriculture is a priority, then it's something that the city can sort of point to and say, your project is going to look a lot better to us if it includes this component or that component. That flexibility exists between government and private sector. I just want to point out that the city has or is in the process of adopting an environmental justice policy or resolution, I should say. And this is a really important and big step, and I think it will inform the city's position, the city's posture when it comes to talking to people about how these areas turn over and redevelop. Anybody else?
At the end of the trail, on West Main Street, is there a plan for a parking spot there?
There is. We've shown a small space for what we call a trailhead and trail parking. I don't know how many spots we have in there right now, maybe half a dozen or so. Parking is a tough one, for a project like this. If the trail really takes off, you could see people driving to the trail to just walk and ride along the river. As I said, 2.2 miles will go into construction next spring, and then with this 2.3 miles or so, you have a 4.5 mile long continuous trail along the river. That's almost 10 miles out and back, and that's a very attractive afternoon workout for somebody. I could see people going to one end or the other and wanting to park and take their bike off the roof and go up and down. We are blessed if this trail starts to suffer from its own success. You know what I mean? It's kind of like we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. If we find that, there are people who are worried that people will park in their driveway, to get to the trail. If we end up having that problem, we've succeeded. These are things that we can fix as time goes by. We can figure out, all right, we need more parking. Where are we going to put it? All right, if the trail is that successful and it's throwing off that much economic benefit to the city, we can afford to buy a vacant parcel and build a new parking lot or something. These are not insolvable problems. That said, we do have one parking lot good for 20 cars or so on West Liberty Street that we're planning to build with this. And we have incorporated a lot of new on-street parking along Jackson Street in the vicinity of the park area. So we have incorporated new parking in certain locations where it was relatively feasible to do so. And also, I just want to point out, you mentioned the end of the trail. We're taking it in this project as far as West Main Street, but the intention, again, is, of course, to keep going north along the river, past Colonial Plaza and all the way up to Watertown, and then connecting into their trail network there. Yes?
If we increase the train service to Waterbury, it would bring more people.
Absolutely, and I think ConnDOT is studying that really hard. And like I said, they have a project on the books now to upgrade the signalization and make that line meet the guidelines required to increase passenger service on the line. I think you have, 8 trains a day now. I don't know what they want to get it to and in what time frame. It's a ConnDOT project and we don't have all the details, but they are working on it. Yes, in the back.
Besides the upgrades to the signal, there is a antiquated law that prevents this part of the state from having electrified rail, and it's something that has to get repealed by the lawmakers. That's on the books. So that's something that has to be worked out as well.
Okay.
They're planning to bring Amtrak to Waterbury by 2025. And it's really
That's 15 years down the road. This is breaking ground recently.
are they supposed to make a multi-station, transportation at the train station?
Yeah, there was a proposal to build a transportation center at the train station. I don't know a whole lot about what that project originally entailed. I know that it is not going forward, but I guess components of it are going forward. Like I said, the Waterbury Development Corporation does have a project that has broken ground to build a new plaza, to bring back the old waiting room and increase surface parking there. And then in concert with that is this new express bus service that will be operating out of that location. We think that the more the train station can be turned into a hub for, regional transportation options, the better. I know that there is I would stop short of calling it a bus station opposite the hotel in downtown, but maybe that functionality could move to the train station. These things should be studied. They're not part of this project, again, because we are pretty focused on what we can do with, the $15 or $20 million that we're asking the federal government for. And we just can't do everything that Waterbury needs with that money. And you've seen what we've proposed to do with that money. But there are a lot of sympathetic efforts that should certainly be pursued that would speak to the same goals that this project is after. And consolidating that sort of regional transportation infrastructure in one hub.